Related to that question, currently the Pentagon takes up 50% of our discretionary spending. Would you favor cutting the Pentagon budget by 15%? That would free up enough money to provide an undergraduate education for every United States citizen and have money left over.
What I would say is this. I believe in bringing our troops home from Iraq. I mean, we're spending $10 to $12 billion a month there, and we have to bring our troops home from Iraq precisely because we have to take care of our own better than we have here at home. I mean, that is absolutely fundamental. I'm not saying that you can recapture all of that, roughly $150 billion a year, because you have issues in Afghanistan. I don't think that it's possible to set arbitrary numbers for what you're going to do, particularly with a defense budget that is so, well, let's just say has a lot of support within the United States Congress. So I think that making sure that we end our engagement in Iraq is one way to free up additional money. And as I said, couldn't guarantee every penny would come back and be available for other uses, but it's an awful lot of money that would be. So, you know, that's the way I would tend to go at this. I think that the next president and the next Congress, in light of this financial crisis, in light of the fact that we have dramatically expanded the annual deficit for the year in which we're in, we're going to have some very, very difficult choices to make. And it's going to be harder than simply moving money from over here to, you know, from one area to another. It's going to be a lot harder than that. We're going to have to try to figure out how to maintain as much stability as we can with a budget that serves, you know, multiple different interests and individuals. But generally, that's where I think we can make the biggest difference. Yes?
This is another economic question. A few days ago, the Federal Reserve announced that it's going to enter the commercial paper market, presumably to, you know, lessen the stranglehold that banks have on the availability of short-term credit. They also announced that that's not going to come out of the $700 billion already allotted to them by Congress. My question is, where's that money going to come from? And if their plan is to just sell Treasury bills, who do you think is going to buy them?
Well, here's what I think probably. I mean, I just saw this in the paper too, so I'm speaking without knowledge any more than a quick glance at the paper. But my guess is they probably will sell Treasury bills in order to do that. But lots of people buying Treasuries right now. Lots of people. And that's part of the problem. Money has been coming out of money market funds, which have always been regarded as the safest place without a guarantee that for people to put their money. Safest place. And that's the market. The money market funds have been the institutions that have loaned, you know, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day, you know, to a lot of companies to smooth out their payroll with that short-term credit, with those short-term loans. I was out at the Sappi plant in Westbrook just you know, about 10 days ago, and the woman who runs the mill, how about that? Glass ceiling broken there. Donna Cassesi, who is the mill manager at the paper mill in Westbrook. I was talking to her, and she was talking about the challenges they have with short-term credit. And this is a market that's hard to understand, but when banks stop lending to other banks, and banks stop lending to companies that they've given money to for years, and when there's one money market fund I read that decided it no longer had the resources or was willing to bear the risk of loaning to colleges and universities that had been their traditional, you know, the traditional recipients of their loans. And so the article that I read said there were now 1,000 universities and colleges around the country who are looking to borrow from somewhere else besides this money market fund. I hope USM isn't one of them. I mean, those changes, I think, are going on. But I would say, I'll bet it's coming from the issuance of Treasury bills, at least in the short term. I don't think they'll have any trouble selling them because people just want the maximum amount of safety they can get. But obviously, you can't have the Treasury take over all of this, you know, commercial paper market, the short-term market. So they've got to do what they can to just free it up and give people some confidence to lend again. But the Fed, I don't see how the Fed can do this on more than a temporary basis. I sure hope it helps. Someone over here, yes.
The recent media coming out about part of the bailout going through, and then the head CEOs in AIG taking a massive vacation, and basically, I think, making a mockery of us.
Yeah.
How are we going to make sure that the bailout is really pushed through to really help our country and not be just used as vacation funds? Yeah,
absolutely. Good question. And people should be very upset by that. The answer with AIG is that AIG wasn't subject to the bailout bill that we passed. Rescue plan, bailout bill, you can call it whatever you want. It was, in fact, I would argue, a plan to stabilize the economy before we essentially all together went over a cliff. Not just the people on Wall Street, but all of us together. Because if the short-term credit markets had shut down and the lending bank to bank and bank to companies stopped across this country, you would see the loss of an extraordinary number of jobs in a very short period of time. Local governments unable to fund construction projects and companies unable to expand or even pay the people who work for them, and we would be in a very deep and dark crisis very fast. Now we're just in a very bad place, but we're not over the cliff. So the answer to the question is, I think that under the bill, the CEOs of those companies who come in to sell distressed assets to the company, to the Treasury, will have to give up any golden parachutes. We're not going to benefit them. We're not going to benefit their companies if they can then go off and be paid golden parachutes. Next year, when hearings start to be held on both the Senate side and the House side on legislation to re-regulate or reform the whole regulatory system for these financial markets, I am confident, I'm not sure what will pass, but I am confident that dealing with CEO compensation, excessive CEO compensation, will be a part of that debate. But we couldn't deal with those issues in 2 weeks. I mean, they're pretty complicated. Yes, Dave.
Well, I want to address the economy too.
Yeah.
You've said it. Barack Obama has said it. This is probably, we're either in the midst or we're approaching probably the worst economic crisis we've seen since the 1930s, since the Great Depression. And one of the things that brought us out of that was the fact that President Roosevelt had an unprecedented cooperation with Congress in terms of, you know, he had these ideas, they went through quickly, they had ideas, they were passed quickly, he signed them. So I'm asking, I want to know, if Barack Obama is elected president, when you get to the Senate, what are some of the things that you're going to support? What are some ideas you have to solve this crisis? Not just in terms of Wall Street and the banks, which Roosevelt did too, but in terms of things like the FDIC and the WPA that you created for ordinary people.
That's a pretty tough question. And the way I would say, I am not going to tell you, standing here, that I now have the plan to save the U.S. economy based on what's happened in the last 2 weeks. I'm not going to tell you that. But I do have a philosophy. And the philosophy is that where this administration went astray, and those in Congress who supported them, is number one, they really believe that the markets work fine on their own. That belief is shattered. They also believe that if you take care of the people at the top, the benefits will trickle down to everyone else. That belief is shattered as well. So that you have to focus your policy, whatever it may be. And I think it's going to take a pragmatic response after some deliberation, and frankly, at the beginning of next year. I mean, I think there's only so much that, you know, we may be back in session for a few more days in November, but I don't think you can expect the Congress and this president on the way out the door are going to be able to grapple in any sustainable way with the real challenges we face. That's going to have to wait until late January, early February, and March. I expect there will be hearings on this whole range of issues almost as soon as the new Congress gets underway. So what I would say is we have to be determined to establish a process. Part of that process is going to be regulation of the financial markets. Part of that process is going to be to take a very close look at basically home prices, mortgages, foreclosures, trying to shore up that particular market in ways that work for the people who are trying to prevent as many foreclosures as possible. There were those of us who wanted to see a provision in the rescue plan bailout bill that would help go directly to people. It wouldn't be just buying up distressed assets, these mortgage-backed securities, but would actually be helping people who are at risk of foreclosure from going under. but that didn't work. You know, that didn't have enough support on the other side of the aisle, and maybe it was too big a change to do in 10 days. But that will be the topic of hearings going forward. And then there need to be more comprehensive, longer-term ideas about how you take an economy where we've had an administration which is hands-off, and I think actually pick some areas that you want to, where you want to create new jobs. And I think the energy crisis, properly understood, is an opportunity for a real boom in the creation of green jobs. I was talking to a guy who owns a machine tool plant up in Kennebec County the other day, and I said, this was just about a week ago, and in the depth of this economy with everyone panicked, I said, well, how are you doing? He said, our business is up 10% this year. And I said, well, how'd that happen? He said, we're making parts for wind turbines. We're making parts for wind turbines. And we've expanded our workforce. And I think that that's one example of what I think is going to take place if we get a strategy for growing this economy that works for the middle class and the small business community, instead of taking care of the big boys at the top. Yes?
First of all, how much money would it cost for us to use your proposed universal health care plan? Would it be something so that working and lower class families could be covered adequately? And second, what made you decide not to support Dennis Kucinish's HR 676 as an alternative?
Right, sure. Let me start with the first question. The answer is I don't know how much it will cost, but it is a plan that we've costed out at $75 to $100 billion from the federal government a year. It's a big deal. This is not easy. Probably can't get done in the first year. But the goal is to take the employer-based health care, the employer-based health insurance market today and make it a public-private partnership so that for lower-income individuals and for smaller businesses, the cost of health insurance is subsidized by the federal government. And that cost is spread across the whole population. And when you do that, you can do it in a more or less progressive way. And, of course, you can drag back overpayments now that we make to the health insurance industry under Medicare and to the pharmaceutical industry under the prescription drug line. You can drag back money to partially pay for this. So I don't know the answer specifically, but it's designed to be an affordable plan that would drive down the cost of business, make some plan available to everyone. It doesn't have a mandate. Because I think it is very hard politically to say to people, I'm going to take away your health care, take away yours, but don't worry, the government's going to take care of you. And I can't tell you how much you're going to have to pay or what kind of policy you're going to have, but you're going to lose what you got now, but you don't worry. You know, when you try to do that, people say, I'm not sure I really want to go down the path you're suggesting. And that is part of the reason why I don't support the kind of single-payer plan that Dennis Kucinich had. Now, single-payer works well in Canada. It has the support of the population. I mean, broadly speaking, even though people down here talk as if it doesn't. It has a very broad support from the population in Canada. People in Canada like their health care system a lot better than people in America like ours. I mean, the polling is dramatically different. But making the transition from one to other, Americans love choices. And they're uneasy if they don't have choices. And so that's why it's so hard to make the conversion. With respect to that plan as well, one of the disadvantages of that plan is that it sets up a centralized mechanism so health care spending for the entire country will be set year by year by a government entity in Washington. And I just don't think that is doable. I just don't think it's doable. And secondly, it knocks out not just all of the private insurance companies, but it also knocks out those same insurance companies which actually administer Medicare. So you have, the Anthem Blue Cross administers the Medicare plan in Maine. So you take them out, and suddenly you're looking at a huge increase in government employees and a huge tax increase to make it all work. And that's why I think we need to go at this in a you know, in a different way. And that's why the plan I've laid out, I think, makes sense. You do create a public plan, but you don't try to impose it on everyone at once. Let me just find, yes.
I want to take a little bit of a different tack here. I'm really concerned about the fact that the first time since the Civil War, an American Army brigade is being housed on U.S. soil for the purposes of counterinsurgency. And Senator Leahy in Vermont has made many public statements about his concern about this. I see it as an extension of the police state under the Bush administration. I want to know, as a senator, what you would do to stem the tide against this kind of police state enforcement that seems to be extending, including through the FISA Act.
Yeah, I would, including FISA? Yeah. I would say if Pat Leahy's worried, then I'm worried. I have enormous respect for him as the chair of the Judiciary Committee. And I just think I would want to completely understand the situation. But the FISA Act I didn't vote for. I mean, I didn't vote for it because I thought it was too intrusive. I thought that there was no reason to give immunity to the telecoms. And I voted, there was one version of the bill that went through the House that I voted for, but then when it came back from the Senate, I didn't vote for it because they had watered it down too much. But, no, I'm sensitive to those areas. I really am, and have a record of being very sensitive to those. But I voted against the continuation of the Patriot Act, for example. It is something we need to watch. I hope and believe that a different administration would take a very different approach to a lot of these issues. Yeah.
One of the largest employers in the state is leaving soon. BNAS Brunswick will be shutting down in a couple of years. One of the other largest and best paying employers is VIW. What would you do as senator to ensure that we continue to have that kind of money coming in through those contracts to pay those members a lot of money and have a great benefit?
Yeah. I would keep doing what I've done in the House. I mean, I've been this very strong advocate, and not everyone will agree with this, but I've been a very strong advocate for Bath Iron Works. I believe a couple of things. We're always going to build destroyers. We can't have them all built at one facility, and if they're going to be built, I would rather see them built at that. And this is an area where in the last year, I've been very aggressive at making sure that that the work at Bath didn't decline because the Navy no longer wanted to continue with the DDG 1000 program. This is sort of, I know, Greek to a lot of people. But this new destroyer, which was once touted as the future of Bath Iron Works, turns out to be one that the Navy doesn't really want more than two. But they are more interested in returning back to the destroyers that Bath has been building for a couple of decades. And those destroyers require more on-site, in-yard work than the newer ones do. And I think it's a better bet going forward. And I've been working with top Navy officials. And it's pretty clear to me that we're going to be able to protect the workload at that yard for years to come. And we might have a little bit of a patch next year, but I don't think so. I think we can. I think it's all going to work out pretty well. Yes.
How or what will you bring to the table that gets out special interest groups and gets a voice more so for the middle class that we can get through what we need to see, like healthcare? I'm sure a lot of people in this country wouldn't mind spending tax money on healthcare if it covered everything.
Right.
But we have special interests that will get in the way every single time that have, amounts of resources to use to lobby. So how do you change that ideology in government to make it so we have a voice? Well,
my parents told me to stand up for what I believe, and that's why in my first term I developed a bill that the pharmaceutical industry, to say they didn't like is an understatement. And eventually it was we were in the minority, and they basically got their way with the Medicare Part D bill, but I'm not giving up. And all I would say is you need the right mix of legislators who are going to be able to keep some of those special interests at arm's length. I mean, there's no magic here. I mean, I'm not saying anything is easy. The two big lobbies in Washington are the pharmaceutical industry and the health insurance industry. And if you're going to do reform, you have to have very strong leadership from the White House, And then you have to have enough people, enough like-minded people in the House and the Senate to keep focused on people back home. And you know, I use examples all the time for people back home, and I tell the story of Bob and Suzanne Kelly as a way of trying to persuade my colleagues, but also trying to persuade people in Maine that we need to have fundamental reform of this healthcare system, or we're in deep trouble. Both because it's only fair that the richest country on earth provide access to healthcare for everybody. And secondly, whether you're talking about General Motors or smaller companies, we're not going to be able to be economically successful if we impose so much of the cost of the healthcare system on business and businesses and their employees. There was someone right up here. Let me go back. Yeah.
How do you feel about, ANWR and drilling offshore or drilling in Alaska instead of, depending on maybe Iraq or Iran?
Yeah, drilling. We need more production. I mean, we're going to keep producing oil, but drilling is just a stopgap. It's not going to get us where we need to go, because we have 3% of the world's reserves. Take Alaska, take off what's offshore in California, offshore in the Atlantic coast and the Gulf of Mexico, add it all up, it's 3% of the world's reserves. And we use 25% of the world's oil. I mean, just do the math. You don't get very far doing that. I'm opposed to drilling in the Gulf of Maine because that's used to be one, and hopefully will be again, one of the richest fishing grounds in the world. The Californians are not going to really allow drilling off their coast. I mean, no way. They've had too many oil spills. It's just not going to happen. So I think there are a few areas. I mean, I think that the Gulf of Mexico is the place where you can do some additional drilling on land that's already leased, and maybe there are a few places where you can expand, but not in ANWR, in my book, not in the Gulf of Maine. And I just think, if you spend too much time focused on drilling, you're really ignoring what you have to do, what we have to do to make a difference. I mean, every one of us can dial down, our carbon footprint. Every one of us can use less, and if we create the right incentives for different forms of, different automobiles that don't run so much on gasoline or get better mileage or run on electricity more than gasoline, you make a lot more progress than thinking you can drill your way out of this particular problem. Good question.
What do you plan to do about domestic violence agencies that are losing their funding?
What do I plan to do about domestic violence agencies that are losing their funding? Come back to the tax policies I mentioned at the beginning. And I think I ran through a list of how funding had been decreased or not keeping up with the increase in need for a whole host of domestic programs. So it's not just those sorts of programs. That's why you need the change. That's why you have to have a different set of priorities. And if you change the economic policies and you provide more support to those entities, to those programs, to those people who are dealing with these underlying social issues that hold us all back, because frankly, what happens to any one of us in this society, it happens or affects all of us. I would say no. I mean, I don't like what the Senate did. The Senate added on all those tax credits and some earmarks, but they would have passed separately anyway. I mean, I don't think they should have passed as part of that rescue plan, if that's what you're talking about.
I am, but weren't they previously defeated with earmarks?
They were only previously, well, let's put them into categories. There were some earmarks for different things. And some of them were passed by the House and some were passed by the Senate, but they hadn't been packaged together and passed by both branches. The bigger money in that bailout rescue plan that was added by the Senate came from a fix for the alternative minimum tax, so another, whatever it is, 10 or 20 million people don't wind up paying a tax that wasn't meant to apply to them. It included renewable energy tax credits for wind and solar, and if that hadn't passed, you would find a lot of wind and solar projects shutting down because they couldn't get the funding to go ahead. And then it had some economic development tax credits, and I forget, there were two of them. and I forget what they are. All of those needed to be passed. They had been part of a tax extenders package that had passed in one form in the House, a different form in the Senate, and the disagreement wasn't over the extenders themselves, but it had to do with whether you offset them, pay for them by some other means. So I think that as much as I dislike the process, the content of that package is actually quite important for moving the economy forward. Because if we shut down, you know, those areas of new jobs like wind and solar at the very moment we're trying to, you know, save the economy in another way, I don't think we're doing well. So this happens. I will tell you, it happens. You can dislike the process that we go through, but the final product sometimes is not so bad. And there are other times when you like the process and the final product is a mess. And as I should say one more thing, there are lots of times when legislation, because Susan Collins uses this word, I want to use it once, bipartisan, 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 but there's lots of bipartisan legislation that is bad, lots of bipartisan legislation, some of it is good, but whether it's bipartisan or not doesn't make it good or bad or right or wrong all by itself. Yes?
My question is, are you familiar with instant runoff voting, and would you support it? It's something that where you can basically would do away with what I hear a lot of is I need to vote for the lesser of two evils.
Right.
You had just mentioned earlier that you're a feminist. There's two women of color running on the presidential ticket probably for the first time ever, and we don't know anything about them, and they weren't allowed to come to debates.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, what are you going to do to open up the doors for more voices to be heard?
No, I really like the idea of instant runoff voting. And what that means is you would be able to mark your ballot for, say, the usual case, for a third party or an independent candidate that you really want to support, but also have the capacity to sort of make a second choice among, say, let's just say, one of the two candidates from the two major parties. And that would be a way to have more voices involved in the election process, be more participation in the election process, more diversity of opinion, but not have the Ralph Naders of the world, for example, be in the position of being spoilers. They could turn the election, I mean, this is what happened in 2000. You know, turn an election in a direction where most of the people voting didn't want it to go. No, I think it's a right idea. Good idea. Yes?
Obama mentioned again last night that he's interested in doubling the size of the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
And as a philosophy major, I don't really have great plans to pay off these loans that I'm taking out right now.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you would be in support of maybe some kind of program that involved loan forgiveness for people who are interested in volunteering their time.
Yep, absolutely. Doubling the Peace Corps, some form of national service. I mean, I think that we're going to need to sort of widen our idea of how people pay for college if we're going to deal with the problems that you're all facing. So that people who can manage to get through and can take some loans and can pay them off can do that. But other people have another path to getting those loans taken care of by some form of national service. And you know, I think we can do that. Take some work, find the money, but it makes sense. Yes?
My question is kind of in regard to a previous question mentioned that having to do with the military being deployed on our own soil.
Yeah.
And I've actually seen the U.S. Humvees driving around Portland, and I'm wondering, and I've also heard that our own soldiers are also being trained in crowd control, and I'm kind of wondering kind of your thoughts and opinions and how you rate that, because personally I think it's, I don't know, it's a little intrusive and it's a little kind of, frankly, kind of scary that we have military being trained to control crowds in Portland, Maine. So I'm just kind of wondering where you put that on.
Well, I can't honestly speak to exactly the situation. What I would say is this: you're going to have soldiers trained in crowd control in other countries. I mean, you're going to have to have that. So I wouldn't worry as much about that. You certainly have National Guard and Reserve vehicles and troops, and even active duty troops, you know, in different places around the country. And I wouldn't worry too much about simply having the military around. It's the mission It's the mission that I think is the biggest issue. And as I say, I can't. You can follow up if you want. I don't know that I can.
Well, what I was wondering is, do you see it as, so you think like that, do you think that the U.S. military being deployed on our own soil in here and in Portland and in Maine is, in fact, like making us safer, or are you kind of against it?
Well, when you say deployed on our own soil,
Like,
I mean, most of our military
earlier.
is here anyway.
What's that?
Most of our military is
Yeah.
here in the United States.
I know, but they're not, I don't know, I guess, I don't know.
Active combat?
Yeah, it's like actually in use, not just being stationed.
I think what he means is exactly what we're talking about, which is that for the first time since the Civil War, a brigade has been deployed to the North American Central Command
Yeah.
to be put in place on American soil and trained for counterinsurgency and crowd control. That's the mission in the United States.
Third Battalion,
Not in
1st Brigade.
theater,
Right.
but here. And that's the one that Leahy is talking about.
Okay, okay. See, I don't know all the details of that, but I share the concern. I mean, I certainly share the concern.
Yeah.
That's why I wasn't picking up. I thought we got troops everywhere across the country. Well, in back, yeah.
All right, my answer to the question. I'm just trying to find out what's the difference between you with the Congress out there. They promise a lot of stuff, but when they get into Congress, nothing will be passed. It's just going to be the same. What you going to do different that can do with the pass of the promise of giving?
Well, what I would say is this: I don't really agree that when people get to Congress, nothing gets passed. I mean, we do pass legislation. Some of it's good. When I gave you an example of 1965, I was giving you an example of a year in which enormous changes, significant changes in legislation were passed in a very short period of time. But this year, for example, I mean, I have passed legislation to make it U.S. policy not to have permanent military bases in Iraq. I passed legislation. These are all enacted into law. Another piece of legislation that would create an independent bipartisan commission to investigate waste, fraud, and abuse I worked on with John Tierney, Massachusetts. And third, a ban, this comes, Barack Obama had the bill on the Senate side, bill to ban the export of elemental mercury, which is a huge problem. Elemental mercury leaves the United States, it goes to developing countries, it's used in something called artisanal mining, and a lot of women and children get contaminated by it. So legislation passes, and we've done, on a larger scale, a whole host of other things. What I would say is, this is a very complicated society, and the complication you can see in the members of the House of Representatives. Let me just say to you, 2/3 of the members of the House of Representatives could not be elected from this district because their views are just outside the mainstream of this district. And so trying to get something done in a body like this is really hard. And it's particularly hard when you have, right now it's the Senate, which is basically split down the middle. You have, it's more or less 50-50. It's 51-49 technically, but Senator Kennedy isn't there, Barack Obama isn't there, John McCain isn't there. It's very hard to get, it was very hard to get much done this year. Now, I have a different vision. I want to be part of a movement. I want to be part of a movement where we get enough like-minded people in the United States Senate and Barack Obama in the White House so we can make the kinds of changes that I think this country needs. And, I mean, I share, believe me, if you work in the world that I've been working in for 12 years, there are moments that are very exciting and lots of moments that are terribly, terribly frustrating because it takes so long to move this country, to move the Congress in the right direction. But that doesn't mean we don't get anything done. It just means that we fall short of what we would like to achieve. But I believe better days are ahead with your help. Thank you. Thank you all.